The harder you try to be happy, the more something inside you resists. It's subtle at first. You don't notice it clearly. You just feel like something is missing. Even when things are going well, even when you're doing everything right, there's still that quiet sense of dissatisfaction, like life is never quite enough. And so you try harder. You set new goals. You improve yourself. You chase better experiences. But somehow, the more you chase happiness, the further away it seems. Krishnamurti pointed to this very contradiction. He suggested that the pursuit of happiness is itself the root of unhappiness. Not because happiness is impossible, but because the act of pursuing it creates division in the mind. There is always what is and what should be. And in that gap, there is struggle. Think about it. The moment you say, "I want to be happy," you are already telling yourself that you are not happy. That simple desire creates a subtle conflict, a tension between your present state and your imagined future. And that tension doesn't bring you closer to happiness. It keeps you stuck in dissatisfaction. We rarely question this. It feels so natural to want happiness. It feels almost necessary. But look closely at what happens inside the mind when happiness becomes a goal. You begin to measure everything. Every experience becomes either good or bad, depending on whether it moves you closer to that goal. You start comparing your life to others. You judge your emotions. You resist anything that feels uncomfortable. And slowly, without realizing it, life becomes a constant evaluation. Krishnamurti would say that this constant measurement is the source of psychological suffering. Because life is not something that can be measured, it's fluid. It changes moment to moment. But the mind wants stability. It wants a permanent state called happiness. And because such a state doesn't exist, the mind is always disappointed. Look at your own experience. A moment of pleasure comes. It feels good. Naturally, you want it to continue. You want more of it. But the moment you want it to last, fear enters. The fear of losing it. The fear that it won't come back. And so pleasure turns into anxiety. What was once simple becomes complicated. This is how the pursuit of happiness quietly turns into a trap. You are no longer living the moment. You are trying to hold on to it, or trying to recreate it, or trying to move toward something better. And in that movement, you miss what is actually here. Krishnamurti wasn't saying that you should reject happiness. He wasn't advocating for a life of cold detachment. What he pointed to was much deeper. He questioned the very structure of desire that says, "I must become something in order to be complete." Because as long as that movement exists, the mind is never at rest. Have you ever noticed how the mind behaves when it's chasing happiness? It becomes restless. It jumps from one thing to another, from one experience to the next. It's always searching, always expecting, always hoping, and that constant movement creates noise, a kind of inner pressure that never fully disappears. Now compare that to a moment when you weren't trying to be happy at all. Maybe you were watching the sunset, or listening to music, or just sitting quietly without any particular intention. In those moments there was no effort, no comparison, no desire to become something else. And yet, there was a sense of peace, even joy. That's the paradox. Happiness seems to appear when you are not looking for it, when the mind is not trying to control or shape the experience, when there is simply awareness of what is happening. But this is where it gets difficult. Because the moment you understand this intellectually, the mind tries to use it as another strategy. It says, "Okay, I shouldn't chase happiness. I'll just be present." And immediately, presence becomes another goal, another thing to achieve, and the cycle continues. Krishnamurti warned about this. He said that truth cannot be approached through method, because any method implies time. It implies becoming, and becoming is the very movement that creates conflict. So what does it mean to stop chasing happiness? Not as an idea, but as an actual experience in daily life. It means seeing the whole movement of desire without trying to change it. Seeing how the mind is always reaching, comparing, hoping. Not judging it. Not suppressing it. Just observing it. When you observe something without trying to control it, something interesting happens. The energy of conflict begins to fade. The mind is no longer divided between what is and what should be. There is only what is. And in that simplicity, there is a different kind of intelligence. This intelligence doesn't come from effort. It comes from clarity, from seeing things exactly as they are. And when the mind sees clearly that chasing happiness only creates unhappiness, that movement begins to slow down naturally. Not because you forced it to stop, but because you understand it completely. And in that understanding, something quiet begins to emerge. Not excitement, not pleasure, but a sense of ease. A sense of being at peace with what is. But most of us don't stay with that simplicity for very long. The mind is conditioned to move, to fix, to improve. So even when we catch a glimpse of that quiet state, we quickly turn it into something to maintain, something to repeat. And the moment we try to hold on to it, it slips away. Krishnamurti often pointed out that the mind is always operating from the known, from memory, from past experiences. When something feels good, the mind records it, and then it seeks to repeat it. This is how pleasure is formed. It's not just the experience itself, but the memory of it, and the desire to have it again. But the repetition of pleasure is never the same as the original moment. It becomes dull, mechanical. And so the mind keeps searching for something stronger, something better. This endless cycle is what creates psychological exhaustion. You may not notice it directly, but it's there. A constant effort to maintain a certain state, to avoid discomfort, to pursue satisfaction. And over time, this effort drains your energy. Life begins to feel heavy, even when nothing is outwardly wrong. Have you ever felt tired for no clear reason? Not physically tired, but mentally drained. That's often the result of this constant inner movement. The mind is always working, always calculating, always trying to get somewhere. And because it never arrives, it keeps going. Krishnamurti would say that this movement is the essence of the self. The me is not a fixed entity. It's a process, a continuous stream of thoughts, memories, desires, and fears. And this process is always seeking continuity. It wants to feel secure. It wants to feel complete. So it projects an image of happiness and moves toward it. But here's the key insight. The self that is seeking happiness is itself the source of disturbance. As long as the center of me is active, there is always conflict. Because the me is built on comparison, on becoming, on the idea that what is now is not enough. So when you chase happiness, it's the self trying to complete itself. And because the self is incomplete by its very nature, the chase never ends. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it. No matter how much you pour in, it never stays full. This is why Krishnamurti emphasized awareness without a center. Awareness that is not driven by the me. Not I am aware, but simply awareness. In that state, there is no one trying to become happy. There is only observation. This may sound abstract, but it's actually very practical. You can see it in your daily life. The next time you feel unhappy, don't immediately try to fix it. Don't reach for distraction. Don't tell yourself a story about why you feel this way. Just watch it. Notice the sensation in your body, the thoughts that come with it, the impulse to escape, the judgment that says, I shouldn't feel like this. Just observe all of it, without choosing. At first, this can feel uncomfortable, because you're used to doing something about your feelings. But if you stay with it, without resistance, something changes. The feeling begins to unfold on its own. It moves, it shifts, it loses its intensity. And more importantly, you begin to see that the problem was never the feeling itself. The problem was the resistance to it, the constant attempt to replace it with something better. When there is no resistance, there is no conflict. And when there is no conflict, the mind becomes quiet. Not through effort, but naturally. In that quietness, there is a different quality of living. You are no longer chasing an ideal. You are not measuring your experience against an image. You are simply present with what is happening. And in that presence, something unexpected begins to appear. A kind of contentment that has no cause. It's not dependent on circumstances. It's not something you achieved, it's just there. This is very different from the happiness we usually talk about. It's not excitement, it's not pleasure, it's not the result of getting what you want. It's a deeper sense of ease, a feeling that nothing is missing. And the strange thing is, this feeling cannot exist when you are looking for it. The moment you say, "This is it, I want to keep this," it disappears. Because now the self is back. Now there is desire. Now there is fear of loss. So the question is not how to be happy. The question is whether the mind can be free from this constant movement of becoming. Because only when that movement ends, even for a moment, does something truly new appear. And maybe that is the real shift. Not asking, "How can I be happy?" but seeing clearly what the pursuit of happiness is doing to your mind. Seeing how it creates pressure, comparison, fear. And once you see it completely, not as an idea, but as something actually happening inside you, that whole movement begins to lose its grip. You don't have to force yourself to stop chasing happiness. You don't have to discipline the mind into stillness. Understanding does the work. When you truly see that chasing happiness only brings dissatisfaction, the mind naturally lets it go. Not because it should, but because it no longer makes sense. And what remains is something very simple. A mind that is not trying to become anything. A mind that is not escaping what it feels. A mind that is not measuring every moment. There is a quietness there. A kind of openness. In that openness, life feels different. You still experience pleasure. You still go through pain. Nothing outward has to change. But inwardly, there is no longer a struggle to turn one into the other. There is no demand that life must feel a certain way for you to be okay. And that's where something real begins. Because happiness, in the way we usually understand it, is always fragile. It depends on conditions, on outcomes, on things going your way. But when the mind is no longer dependent on those conditions, there is a deeper sense of well-being. Something steady, something quiet. You may not even call it happiness anymore. It feels more like being at ease, like nothing is missing, even if nothing is perfect. So perhaps the truth is this. Happiness is not something you can chase, hold, or achieve. It comes when the chase ends, when the mind stops trying to become something else, when it is fully here, with what is. And in that stillness, without effort, without intention, happiness appears. Not because you found it, but because you stopped running away from yourself.